Don't leave. I need this, the widow whispered as the Hell's Angel biker held her tightly. She thought she was just trying to help a broken man in a therapy room. But the moment his tough hands began to shake, she realized something terrifying. This outlaw wasn't just hiding pain. He was hiding a past that connected straight to her husband's death. When she begs him not to leave, the biker pulls away, torn between wanting peace and knowing his old club is hunting him down. But the most shocking part? They've started watching her too. As danger closes in and secrets from the fire rise back to the surface, this widow must decide if she's saving a man with a wounded soul or stepping straight into the world that almost destroyed him. What happens when the only person who makes you feel alive is the one person you should fear the most? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the Trauma Recovery Center, casting long shadows across the worn carpet of the hallway. Dana Whitmore walked those familiar corridors, her sensible shoes making soft sounds against the floor. Her name badge caught the light as she moved, the plastic surface reflecting tiny spots of brightness onto the pale walls. 2 years. The weight of that time still pressed heavily on her heart as she clutched her folder of patient files. The silver wedding band on her left hand felt especially noticeable this morning, as it did most mornings when she arrived for her volunteer shift. She touched it briefly, a habit she'd developed since losing Mark in the fire. "Good morning, Dana," called Sandra from the front desk, her voice warm and familiar. "I've got your new patient assignment right here." Dana managed a small smile, tucking a strand of shoulder-length brown hair behind her ear. "Thanks, Sandra. Anything I should know?" Sandra's expression shifted slightly, her usual cheerful demeanor taking on a more serious note. "Well, he's different from your usual cases. Former Hell's Angel. The referral came through the burn unit at County." Dana's heart did a little skip at the mention of burns, but she kept her face neutral. After Mark, anything involving fire made her pulse quicken. But this was her work now, helping others heal, finding purpose in their pain. She took the file from Sandra's outstretched hand. "Session room 3, Sandra added, watching Dana with slight concern. The walk to session room 3 felt longer than usual. Dana reviewed the basics from the file. Joshua Maddox, mid-40s, extensive trauma history. The photo showed a hard-faced man with deep scars along one side of his face and neck. His eyes in the intake photo were challenging, almost hostile. When she opened the door, the man's physical presence seemed to fill the small room. Joshua Maddox perched, on the edge of his chair like a cornered animal ready to spring. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his scarred features. His size was imposing, his broad shoulders tense beneath the worn leather. "Good morning, Mr. Maddox. I'm Dana Whitmore." She kept her voice gentle but professional, settling into her chair with deliberate calm. He snorted, a sound of pure derision. "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable, lady. I'm only here because my PO said I had to be." Dana placed her folder on the small table between them, noting how his eyes tracked every movement. "I understand this isn't your first choice. Would you prefer I call you Joshua or Mr. Maddox?" "Whatever." His eyes darted around the room, taking in the generic inspirational posters on the walls, the box of tissues on the table, the window with its partially opened blinds. His leg bounced with barely contained energy. "Joshua, then," Dana said softly. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled and uncurled against his thighs. "Can you tell me what brought you here today?" His laugh was harsh, without humor. "What brought me here? A bunch of do-gooders who think talking about feelings is gonna fix everything wrong with the world. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. This whole thing is a joke. Dana met his gaze steadily, despite the intimidating intensity of his stare. Sometimes talking is just a starting point. It doesn't have to fix everything. Joshua's eyes narrowed. Listen, I've seen enough shrinks and social workers to last a lifetime. They all want to dig around in your head, make you spill your guts about every bad thing that ever happened. Well, I'm not interested. The referral mentioned there was an incident involving a fire, Dana said quietly, watching carefully for his reaction. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Joshua's hands, which had been gesturing dismissively, suddenly stilled. A tremor passed through them before he quickly shoved them into his jacket pockets. The blood seemed to drain from his face, making his scars stand out more starkly. There's nothing to talk about, he said, but his voice had lost some of its aggressive edge. Something vulnerable flickered across his features before being quickly buried beneath a scowl. Dana recognized the signs of someone fighting against their own memories. She saw it often enough in her work at the center, but there was something different about Joshua's reaction, something that resonated with her own carefully contained grief. It's okay if you're not ready to discuss it, she offered. We can start somewhere else. We're not starting anywhere, Joshua said, pushing to his feet with sudden violence. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is a waste of time. His boots made heavy sounds as he strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with something, his broad shoulders tense beneath the leather jacket. Without looking back, he yanked the door open and disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind only the lingering scent of leather and the echo of his boots in the corridor. Dana remained seated, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands shook slightly as she opened her notebook to make her session notes. The blank page seemed to stare back at her, much like Joshua's guarded eyes had moments ago. The morning sun had shifted, creating new patterns on the carpet. Dana found herself thinking about the tremor in Joshua's hands, the flash of raw fear she'd glimpsed when fire was mentioned. As a counselor, she recognized the signs of deep trauma. As a widow who had lost her husband to flames, she recognized something more: the haunted look of someone who had seen fire's destructive power up close. She began to write her notes, her pen moving slowly across the paper. Professional observations mixed with personal insights. Patient displays significant defensive mechanisms, strong aversion to discussing fire-related trauma, physical indicators of PTSD. But between the clinical words, she found herself noting the moments when his tough exterior had cracked, revealing glimpses of the pain he worked so hard to hide. Setting down her pen, Dana sat back in her chair. The frustration of the failed session mingled with an unexpected surge of empathy. Whatever had happened to Joshua Maddox, whatever he'd seen or done, she recognized in him the same raw grief she carried in her own heart, carefully contained, but always present. She gathered her materials slowly, knowing she had other patients to see today. But something about this session, despite its abrupt end, felt different. Perhaps it was the way Joshua's hands had trembled, or the flash of vulnerability she'd caught in his eyes. Whatever it was, she couldn't shake the feeling that beneath his hostile exterior lay a story that needed to be told when he was ready to tell it. Standing up, Dana straightened her chair and gathered her folders. The morning light caught her wedding ring again, and she touched it briefly, a habit both comforting and painful. In the quiet of the empty room, she allowed herself a moment to acknowledge both her professional frustration and the surprising pull of compassion she felt toward her newest patient. Dana arrived at the trauma center well before her scheduled shift the next afternoon. The empty halls echoed with her footsteps, as she made her way to her small office, clutching both her coffee and a worn copy of Approaches to Resistant Trauma Patients. She'd spent half the night reviewing techniques, determined to find a way to reach Joshua Maddox. Settling at her desk, she spread out her notes from yesterday's session. The morning light filtered through the blinds, creating stripes across the papers where she'd documented his defensive behavior, his trembling hands, the way he'd fled when fire was mentioned. She took a long sip of coffee, remembering how his tough exterior had cracked for just a moment. "Start with grounding exercises," she murmured to herself, reviewing her planned approach. "Create safety first. No pressure to share." The techniques were familiar, but something about Joshua made her want to be extra prepared. Perhaps it was the way his pain seemed to mirror her own, though she pushed that thought aside, maintaining professional distance. When Joshua arrived for their afternoon session, his entrance was less dramatic than the day before. He still filled the doorway with his broad-shouldered presence, but the aggressive energy had dimmed to a low simmer. His leather jacket creaked as he lowered himself into the chair, eyes fixed somewhere over her left shoulder. "Thanks for coming back," Dana said softly, noting how his jaw clenched at her words. "Didn't have much choice," he muttered. "It's this or more trouble than it's worth." Dana nodded, acknowledging his honesty. "Today I thought we might try something simple. No deep diving, no heavy discussions, just a basic grounding exercise." Joshua's eyes finally met hers, suspicious but curious. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It's about staying present in the moment," she explained, keeping her voice steady and calm. "Sometimes our thoughts can take us places we don't want to go. This helps bring us back." She demonstrated the breathing pattern, watching as Joshua reluctantly followed along. His hands rested on his knees, and she noticed they were steadier today. The morning light caught the edges of his scars, making them seem less harsh. "Now, name 5 things you can see in this room," she instructed. Joshua's lip curled. "This is stupid." But after a moment he continued, "Chair, window, plant, your coffee cup, that weird painting on the wall." They moved through the exercise, naming things they could hear, smell, touch. With each step, Dana noticed his shoulders dropping slightly, his breathing becoming more natural. Then she asked him to name one thing he could feel emotionally. The change was instant. Joshua surged to his feet, the chair scraping back. "We're done here." He took 2 long strides towards the door, hand reaching for the handle. But instead of yanking it open like yesterday, he stopped. His fingers curled into a fist against the wood. "I can't." His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "I can't go back there. Not even in my head. It's bad enough at night when I can't stop it." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He stood frozen, hand still on the door, as if shocked by his own vulnerability. Dana remained seated, careful not to move suddenly. "This isn't an interrogation, Joshua," she said gently. "Whatever haunts your nights, you don't have to share it until you're ready. Maybe not even then. This is just a space for honesty." Long seconds ticked by. Dana could hear the distant sounds of the center, phones ringing, voices in other rooms, the hum of the air conditioning. Finally, Joshua's hand dropped from the door. His shoulders were still tense, but something had shifted in his stance. Slowly, he turned back to the room. The chair he'd abandoned stood between them like a barrier. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he didn't immediately look away. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "None of us do, at first," Dana replied. "We just start where we are." Joshua sank back into the chair, his shoulders heavy with unspoken weight. But the rigid defiance had drained from his posture, replaced by something closer to exhaustion. They spent the rest of the session in simpler territory, discussing the center's other programs, the weather, neutral topics that helped him regain his footing after that moment of raw honesty. As evening approached, the session drew to a close. Joshua stood more slowly this time, adjusting his jacket with hands that remained steady. At the door, he paused again, but this time the silence felt different, thoughtful rather than threatening. "Same time tomorrow?" Dana asked. He nodded once, sharp and quick, before stepping out into the corridor. Through the window, she watched him walk into the fading daylight, his expression conflicted but no longer closed off entirely. Dana remained in her chair, watching the shadows lengthen across the carpet. She thought about the moment he'd stopped at the door, about the courage it had taken to voice even that small admission about his nightmares. Something protective stirred in her chest, a sense of responsibility toward this wounded soul who'd shown her, however briefly, the depth of his pain. Her wedding ring caught the last rays of sunlight as she gathered her notes. The familiar ache of grief mingled with something new, a determination to help Joshua find his way back from whatever darkness haunted him, even if she wasn't quite sure why it mattered so much. Dana arrived at the trauma center early that morning, coffee in hand, expecting another quiet hour to prepare for the day. Instead, she found Joshua Maddox already there, his broad shoulders hunched as he paced the hallway like a caged animal. His boots made heavy sounds against the linoleum floor, back and forth, 6 steps one way, 6 steps back. She paused at the corner, watching him for a moment. Something was different today. The defensive anger that usually radiated from him had been replaced by a nervous energy she hadn't seen before. His hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Joshua," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. "We weren't scheduled for another hour." He stopped pacing and turned to face her. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, making the scars on his face stand out more starkly in the fluorescent lighting. "Couldn't wait," he said gruffly. "Need to ask you something." Dana unlocked the session room and gestured for him to enter. He stayed standing while she sat down, her things, his body practically vibrating with tension. "Your last name," he started, then stopped, swallowed hard. "Whitmore. That's not... You weren't..." Understanding dawned slowly as Dana watched him struggle with the words. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was married to Mark Whitmore. He was a firefighter with Station 12. The color drained from Joshua's face so quickly that Dana worried he might pass out. He groped blindly for the chair behind him and sank into it, looking like a man who'd just been hit by a truck. "The North Point warehouse," he whispered. 2 years ago." Dana's hands went still on her notepad. The warm September morning suddenly felt ice cold. "You were there?" Joshua nodded, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "I was the one who broke open the side entrance, when the first responders arrived." His voice cracked. "They needed a way in. The main doors were blocked by debris. I had my bike chain, used it to break the lock on the emergency exit." Dana's mind flashed back to that terrible night. The phone call at 3 a.m, the rush to the hospital, the devastating news that Mark hadn't made it out. And now, sitting across from her, was someone who had been there in those crucial moments. "The reports mentioned someone helping the firefighters gain access," she said softly. "But they never knew who it was. You just disappeared afterward." "Couldn't stay." Joshua's voice was rough with emotion. "Couldn't face it. We tried to get more people out, but the smoke was too thick. The heat..." He shuddered. "Your husband, he went back in for the others. I wanted to help, but they wouldn't let civilians near. I watched him go in, and then..." His hands were shaking now, and Dana realized her own were too. The silence in the room felt heavy with shared grief and long-buried memories. "I dream about it," Joshua continued, barely audible. "Every night. The screams, the crackling of the flames, watching those brave men go in, knowing." He finally looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "I'm so sorry. I should have done more. Should have found another way in. Should have—" "Stop," Dana said firmly, though her voice wavered. Mark made his choice. That's who he was, always putting others first. No one could have stopped him from trying to save those people. She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "And you did help. Breaking open that entrance gave them a fighting chance. Without it, they might not have saved anyone at all." Joshua shook his head, his guilt a tangible thing between them. "Doesn't feel like enough. Never will." They sat in silence for a long moment, both lost in memories of that night. The afternoon sun crept across the carpet, marking the passage of time neither of them noticed. Dana found herself studying Joshua's face, seeing him in a new light. This man who carried such heavy guilt, who had tried to help in whatever way he could, who disappeared into the night rather than face recognition or gratitude. "Is that why you're here?" she asked eventually. "At the trauma center?" "Partly," he admitted. "The nightmares got worse, started affecting my work. My doctor suggested therapy, but I kept putting it off. Then when I saw your name on the intake form..." He ran a hand over his face. "Almost walked out that first day. Couldn't believe the universe would be that cruel." Dana understood the feeling. The coincidence seemed almost impossible. That, of all the counselors at the center, he would be assigned to her. That their paths would cross again in this way, both still carrying scars from that night. As the session drew to a close, neither made any move to leave. The silence between them had transformed from awkward to something else, a shared understanding, a connection forged through mutual loss and long-buried truth. Finally, Joshua stood, his movements heavy with exhaustion. "I should go." Dana nodded, rising as well. No more words seemed necessary. They had said enough for one day, perhaps more than either had been prepared for. She watched from the window as Joshua mounted his motorcycle in the parking lot. Even from this distance, she could see the weight of the past pressing down on his shoulders as he rode away, his form disappearing into the late afternoon traffic. Getting into her own car, Dana sat for a long moment with the key in the ignition. Joshua's confession played over and over in her mind, the break in his voice, the raw pain in his eyes, the way he carried the guilt of that night like a physical burden. She thought about Mark, about his unwavering commitment to helping others, about how he would have appreciated the stranger who broke down that door to help save lives. The drive home was a blur, her thoughts too full of fire and smoke, and the strange twists of fate that had brought Joshua Maddox back into her life. Not as a nameless good Samaritan, but as a man drowning in the same grief that had nearly consumed her 2 years ago. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with approaching rain. Dana arrived early at the trauma center, her mind still swimming with yesterday's revelations about Joshua and the warehouse fire. She arranged her files, checked her schedule, and waited for Joshua's 10 o'clock appointment. 10 o'clock came and went. Dana kept glancing at the clock, trying to focus on paperwork but finding her attention wandering. By 10:30, she knew he wasn't coming. "Everything okay?" Margaret, the center's receptionist, poked her head in. "Your 10 o'clock's a no-show?" Dana nodded, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, just catching up on some notes instead." But as she went through her day, counseling a teenage girl struggling with anxiety, meeting with a veteran dealing with PTSD, guiding a group session for domestic violence survivors, her thoughts kept drifting to Joshua. The way he'd looked yesterday when he'd left, shoulders heavy with the weight of old guilt. She wondered if sharing the truth about the warehouse fire had been too much, too soon. The light drizzle that had threatened all day finally began falling as evening approached. Dana gathered her things, said goodnight to the cleaning staff, and headed for the parking lot. The asphalt gleamed wet under the streetlights, puddles reflecting the glow in broken pieces. She was fishing for her car keys when she saw him. Joshua stood beside his motorcycle at the far end of the lot, water beading on his leather jacket. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his stance, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. Her heart began to pound. "Joshua?" She approached slowly, her boots clicking against the wet pavement. "I missed you this morning. Is everything all right?" Up close, his face was drawn and haunted. Water dripped from his hair, but he seemed not to notice. "I shouldn't be here," he said roughly. "Shouldn't be anywhere near you." "What's wrong?" The fear in his voice made her own chest tighten. He pulled out his phone, hands trembling slightly as he showed her a text message. The words glowed harsh in the dim light. "Time to come home, brother. Or the people you're getting close to might have some accidents. Your choice." Dana's breath caught. "Your old club?" Joshua nodded, shoving the phone back in his pocket. "They've been watching. They know I'm here, know about—" He gestured helplessly between them. "About therapy. About you." The drizzle was falling harder now, cold drops sliding down Dana's neck. "What are you going to do?" "Only thing I can do." His voice was rough with pain. "Disappear. Get as far away from here, from you, as I can. It's the only way to keep you safe." "Joshua, no!" The words burst from her before she could stop them. "I have to." His voice cracked. "These people, Dana, they don't make idle threats. I've seen what they do to people who cross them. I can't—" He swallowed hard. "I can't let that happen to you. Not after everything else." The rain was steady now, soaking through Dana's light jacket. She took a step closer, then another, until she was close enough to see the torment in his eyes. "Don't leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need this." The words hung between them in the rain-soaked air. Joshua looked stricken, as if she'd physically struck him. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Please," Dana continued, hardly aware of what she was saying. "We've barely started to work through what happened. And yesterday, when you told me about the fire, about Mark—" She drew a shaking breath. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like someone truly understood. Joshua's face was a mask of anguish. She could see the battle raging behind his eyes, the need to protect her warring with something else, something deeper and more vulnerable. The rain fell harder, drumming against the parked cars around them. Water streamed down Joshua's face as he stared at her, caught between fear and longing. For a moment, just a moment, he swayed toward her. Then he stepped back, shaking his head. Without a word, he turned and walked away into the storm, leaving Dana standing alone in the rain. She watched his figure disappear into the darkness, her heart pounding and her clothes soaked through, feeling as if something vital had just slipped through her fingers. The steady drumming of the rain couldn't quite mask the sound of his motorcycle roaring to life somewhere in the distance. Dana wrapped her arms around herself, trembling now from more than just the cold, as worry for Joshua settled like a weight in her chest. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Dana pulled into the trauma center's parking lot. Her eyes felt gritty from a sleepless night spent worrying about Joshua. As she walked toward the entrance, movement near the building caught her attention. Her heart skipped a beat. Joshua stood by the center's front doors, leather jacket draped over one arm in the early morning warmth. He looked as exhausted as she felt, dark circles shadowing his eyes. When he saw her, he straightened up from where he'd been leaning against the wall. "I couldn't do it," he said simply as she approached. "Rode all night, trying to convince myself to leave town, but I kept ending up back here." Dana's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the front door. "Come inside," she said softly. "We can talk in my office." The center was quiet this early, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Dana led him to a private consultation room, closing the door behind them. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting warm squares on the carpet. "The threat from your old club," she began, settling into her chair. "It's real?" Joshua sank into the seat across from her, running a hand over his face. "Yeah. But running..." He shook his head. "Running just proves them right. Proves I'm still the scared kid they molded into their perfect soldier." "Tell me about that kid," Dana said gently. For a long moment, Joshua was silent, staring at his hands. "Mom died when I was 12, he finally said. Dad was, well, he was gone more than he was around. The club became my family. They gave me what I thought was strength." His laugh was bitter. "Took me years to realize it was just anger wrapped in leather and chrome." Dana leaned forward. "And now?" "Now?" Joshua met her eyes. "Now I'm tired of letting fear drive me. That fire..." His voice caught. "Your husband, he ran into that warehouse knowing the risks. That's real courage. What I did, breaking down that door, that was just instinct. But him?" Joshua shook his head. "He was a hero." They talked for hours, the morning light shifting across the room. Joshua spoke of his childhood trauma, of the false brotherhood that had seemed to save him. Dana shared stories of Mark, not just his final act of bravery, but the quiet courage of his everyday life. When they finally emerged from the consultation room, the parking lot was bathed in late afternoon sun. Dana turned her key in her truck's ignition, but instead of the familiar rumble, there was only a clicking sound. "Battery's dead?" Joshua asked, appearing at her window. Dana tried again with no success. "Looks like it. I'll have to call a tow truck." "Pop the hood," Joshua said. "Let me take a look first." She did as he asked, watching as he bent over the engine. His hands, which had trembled so much during their first sessions, were steady now as they moved over the machinery. "See this?" He pointed to a corroded cable. "Battery connection's loose. Easy fix if you've got some tools." Dana had a basic toolkit in her truck, and soon they were working side by side in the golden evening light. Joshua explained each step as he worked, his voice growing more relaxed as he shared his knowledge of engines and mechanical systems. "My dad taught me this stuff," he said, tightening a bolt. "On good days when he was sober, he'd let me help in his garage. Those were the times I felt closest to him." Dana handed him a wrench. "Mark was like that with his tools. He could fix anything, but what he really loved was teaching others how to do it themselves." Joshua's hands stilled for a moment. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Dana said softly. "And he would have appreciated what you did that night at the warehouse. You gave him and his team a chance to save lives." Joshua finished the repair in silence, his movements careful and precise. When he closed the hood, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Try it now," he said. Dana turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you, Joshua, for this and for coming back." He stood beside her truck, one hand resting on the door. In the fading light, she could see something new in his expression, a cautious lightness, as if some of the weight he carried had begun to lift. "I'll see you tomorrow?" she asked. Joshua nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Tomorrow, he agreed. He walked to his motorcycle, started it up, and rode away into the evening, leaving Dana with the sense that something had shifted between them, something fragile but full of possibility. The warmth of the day still lingered in the air as Dana drove home, her truck running smoothly thanks to Joshua's careful work. She thought about the stories they'd shared, the quiet understanding that had grown between them, and felt the first stirrings of hope, not just for Joshua's healing, but for her own as well. The spring sunshine warmed the sidewalk outside the trauma center as volunteers bustled about, setting up tables and unloading boxes for the community outreach event. Dana checked items off her clipboard, directing people with gentle efficiency when movement at the edge of the parking lot caught her eye. Joshua stood there, leather jacket traded for a plain black t-shirt that did little to soften his imposing presence. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, watching the cheerful chaos with the wary expression of someone who wasn't sure they belonged. Dana walked over, her shoes clicking against the pavement. "I'm glad you came." "Not sure I should have," Joshua muttered, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Don't exactly fit in with all this." "Everyone fits in here," Dana said firmly. "Besides, we could really use some help with the heavy lifting. Got a bunch of elderly veterans bringing donations, and those boxes won't move themselves." Before Joshua could protest, an old pickup truck rattled into the lot, its bed loaded with cardboard boxes. Two older men in faded military caps climbed out slowly, their movements stiff with age. "Perfect timing," Dana said, giving Joshua a gentle push forward. "Why don't you help Mr. Collins and Mr. Martinez unload?" Joshua hesitated for just a moment before walking over. "Let me get those for you, sir," he said, his voice softer than usual as he reached for the first box. "Appreciate it, son," Mr. Collins said, stepping back. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." As Joshua worked, Dana noticed how carefully he handled each box, checking with the veterans about where things should go. When Mr. Martinez mentioned a few broken walkers they'd brought to donate, Joshua's eyes lit up with interest. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. "Pretty good with repairs." Soon, Joshua was settled in a quiet corner of the parking lot, tools spread around him as he tightened loose screws and oiled squeaky wheels. Other volunteers began drifting over, curious about his work. A retired nurse brought him a cup of coffee. A teenage boy with a surly expression watched intently as Joshua explained how to adjust the walker's height. Dana found herself pausing in her rounds to watch him. The tension in his shoulders had eased, and occasionally she caught the flash of a genuine smile as he talked with people. It was like watching a flower slowly unfurl in the sunlight. Beautiful, and somehow fragile. By late afternoon, the event was winding down. Joshua had fixed not only the walkers, but also a wheelchair and 3 canes, earning heartfelt thanks from the veterans and admiring comments from other volunteers. "We've got to get these extra supplies back to the storage unit," Dana said, approaching Joshua as he packed up his tools. "Would you mind helping?" "Sure," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Lead the way." They loaded the boxes into Dana's truck, working in comfortable silence. The drive to the storage facility was short, but something had shifted in the air between them. Joshua told her about learning to fix things in his father's garage, and Dana shared funny stories about Mark's less successful home repair attempts. "He once tried to fix our kitchen sink," Dana said, laughing as she unlocked the storage unit. "Ended up flooding the whole first floor. Had to call a plumber at midnight." Joshua chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Remind me never to let you near my plumbing." "Hey," Dana pretended to be offended. "I'll have you know I've successfully changed a light bulb all by myself." Their laughter echoed in the concrete hallway as they carried boxes inside. Working together, they quickly organized everything onto shelves. As Dana reached up to adjust a box, she lost her balance slightly. Joshua's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Careful," he said softly. She turned, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, but Joshua's eyes were steady on hers. Something electric crackled in the space between them. Dana felt herself swaying forward slightly, drawn by the warmth in his gaze. Joshua's hand was still on her arm, his thumb tracing a gentle arc across her skin. The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, this breath, this closing distance between them. Their faces were inches apart when a voice called out, "Dana, are you still here?" They jumped apart like startled teenagers. Sarah, one of the center's staff members, appeared at the unit's entrance. "Oh, good. We need your signature on some forms before you go." I'll be right there," Dana managed, her heart pounding. Joshua had stepped back, his expression a mixture of longing and uncertainty. "I should get going," he said quietly. They walked to the parking lot in charged silence. The setting sun painted everything in warm orange light, making the moment feel dreamlike and surreal. "Thanks for coming today," Dana said as they reached their vehicles. "Everyone really appreciated your help." "Thanks for making me feel welcome," Joshua replied, his voice rough with emotion. They stood there for a moment longer, both clearly thinking about what had almost happened in the storage unit. Then, with a small nod, Joshua swung onto his motorcycle and started the engine. Dana watched him ride away, the sunset gilding his silhouette in gold. Her lips tingled with the ghost of an almost kiss, and her heart felt both lighter and more complicated than it had that morning. She touched her arm where his hand had been, remembering the gentle pressure of his fingers, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her. With a shaky breath, she got into her truck and headed home, knowing that tomorrow at the center would feel different now, charged with this new awareness between them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the therapy room windows as Dana watched Joshua struggle through another attempted breathing exercise. His broad shoulders were tight with tension, and his fingers drummed restlessly against his knee. After 10 minutes of false starts and frustrated sighs, she gently set her notebook aside. "Something's weighing on you today," she said softly. "Would you like to talk about it?" Joshua stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His reflection showed a haunted expression she hadn't seen since their earliest sessions. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the building's air conditioning. "I shouldn't be here," he finally said, his voice rough. "Being here, seeing you, it's not safe anymore." Dana leaned forward in her chair. "What happened?" He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "They found me last night, 3 of them, including the club's enforcer, cornered me outside my apartment." "Your old club?" Dana's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. Joshua nodded, running a hand through his hair. "They've been watching. They know about the center, about the volunteer work." He paused, swallowing hard. "About you." A chill ran down Dana's spine. "What exactly did they say?" "The enforcer, Joshua's fists clenched. "He described your truck. Said they knew your schedule when you leave the center each night. He mentioned your address, Dana. The color of your front door." Dana felt the blood drain from her face, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "We need to report this. The center has protocols for threats against staff and volunteers, and the police—" "No!" Joshua's voice was sharp with fear. "You don't understand. Going to the cops would make it worse, much worse. These guys, they operate on loyalty and control. Any hint of law enforcement involvement would be seen as the ultimate betrayal." "Then what's your solution?" Dana stood, taking a step toward him. "Running away? Letting them win? If it keeps you safe?" He met her gaze. "Yes." "That's not acceptable. Dana moved closer, noting how he tensed but didn't back away. "We can talk to Dr. Carter. The center has security measures, connections with victim advocacy groups. They're not some angry ex-boyfriend we can stop with a restraining order," Joshua interrupted. "These are men who've spent decades operating outside the law. They have connections everywhere and they're patient. They'll wait until the heat dies down, until people let their guard down." His voice cracked, and he turned back to the window. The setting sun painted his face in shades of amber and shadow. "I never should have let myself get close to anyone here. I knew better. I knew what could happen." Dana watched his reflection, saw the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt and fear. "Joshua, look at me." When he didn't move, she stepped closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of leather and motor oil that always seemed to cling to him. "Please." Slowly he turned. In the fading light, his scars seemed deeper, his eyes darker with remembered violence. Dana fought the urge to reach for him, knowing he was already pulling away emotionally. "You're not responsible for their actions," she said firmly. "And pushing away people who care about you isn't the answer." "Isn't it?" His laugh was bitter. "The only reason you're in danger is because of me? Because I was selfish enough to think I could have a normal life, could help people instead of hurting them." He grabbed his helmet from the chair. "I won't be the reason you get hurt. I can't." "Joshua, wait." But he was already moving toward the door, his steps quick and purposeful. At the threshold, he paused, his back to her. "I'm sorry, Dana. For everything." Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway. Dana stood alone in the dimming room, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and frustration. The sunset threw bars of orange light across the floor, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the growl of a motorcycle engine fading into the gathering dusk. She sank into her chair, trying to steady her breathing. The threat felt real now, tangible in a way that made her skin crawl. But underneath the fear was a deeper ache. The pain of watching someone she cared about retreat behind walls she'd thought they'd finally broken through. The room grew darker as the sun disappeared completely, leaving Dana sitting in the shadows, her mind racing with worry for Joshua and uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring. Dawn painted the trauma center's parking lot in shades of pearl and lavender as Dana pulled into her usual spot. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night with worry about Joshua. The clock on her dashboard read 6:45 in the morning, nearly an hour before the center officially opened. Inside, the hallways were quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Dana made her way to the front desk, where Marie, the early morning receptionist, was already sorting through messages. "Morning, Dana." Marie's smile faded as she picked up a pink message slip. "I need to tell you, Joshua Maddox called late last night. He canceled all his future appointments." Dana's hand tightened on her purse strap. "Did he say why?" "Just that he wouldn't be coming back. He wouldn't leave a callback number." Marie's eyes held sympathy. "I know you were making real progress with him." Dana nodded mechanically, walking to her office on unsteady legs. Once inside, she sank into her chair and pulled out her phone. She'd already tried calling Joshua 3 times last night, but maybe... The automated voice was immediate. "We're sorry, but the number you have dialed is no longer in service." He'd disconnected his phone. Of course he had. The morning crawled by in a fog. Dana went through the motions with her other clients, but her mind kept drifting to Joshua. During a session with a teenage girl struggling with anxiety, Dana caught herself staring at the empty chair where Joshua usually sat, his presence somehow still filling the space. "Ms. Whitmore?" The girl's voice snapped Dana back to the present. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." Dana forced a smile. Let's get back to those breathing exercises we were discussing." But she wasn't fine. The familiar ache of abandonment pressed against her chest. The same hollow feeling she'd carried after Mark's death. She'd thought she was past this, thought she'd learned to guard her heart. Yet here she was, caring too much about someone who'd walked away. During her lunch break, Dana sat in her car, staring at her phone. She'd tried Joshua's number again, knowing it was futile. The rational part of her mind understood why he'd left. He truly believed he was protecting her. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. The afternoon sessions blurred together. Dana found herself checking the parking lot between appointments, hoping to see Joshua's motorcycle. But the space where he usually parked remained empty. Miles away, in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, Joshua lay on a sagging mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The room smelled of old cigarettes and despair, but it was anonymous, exactly what he needed. His dismantled phone lay in pieces on the nightstand. He'd taken it apart the night before, after the 10th time his finger had hovered over Dana's number. The old burner phone he'd switched to held no contacts, no history, no temptation to reach out. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the enforcer's face, heard the casual way he'd described Dana's daily routine. "Pretty lady," the man had sneered. "Be a shame if something happened to her." Joshua's fists clenched at the memory. He'd seen what the club did to people who tried to leave, to the ones they considered traitors. The thought of Dana becoming collateral damage in his attempted escape from that life was unbearable. But her voice echoed in his mind. "Don't leave. I need this." The words haunted him, mixing with memories of their almost kiss in the sunset, of working together on her truck, of the way she looked at him like he was worth saving. Had he made a terrible mistake? Night fell, bringing with it the familiar parade of nightmares. Joshua jerked awake every hour, sweating and disoriented. The warehouse fire blazed behind his eyelids, but now Dana was trapped inside instead of Mark, calling for help he couldn't provide. Across town, Dana lay in her own bed, watching shadows play across her ceiling. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence more pronounced. She thought of Joshua in that last moment before he'd walked away, how defeated he'd looked. Where was he now? Was he safe? The questions circled like restless birds, keeping sleep at bay. She rolled onto her side, facing the empty half of the bed where Mark used to sleep. The grief felt different now. Not the raw, crushing weight of early widowhood, but a softer ache tangled with new pain. She'd opened her heart again, tentatively, carefully, only to have it bruised in a different way. The digital clock on her nightstand clicked over to 3 a.m. In his motel room, Joshua watched the same minute change on the cheap alarm clock, both of them lying awake in separate places, connected by the weight of what remained unsaid. Dana curled around her pillow, remembering how it felt to stand close to Joshua, to see the gentle way he handled broken things despite his scarred hands. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes. In his motel room, Joshua pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to block out the image of Dana's face when he'd left, the hurt she'd tried to hide, the strength she'd shown even then. His chest ached with the certainty that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, even as he told himself it was the only choice he could have made. The night stretched on, holding them both in its grip, two hearts beating in different places, equally broken, equally alone. The fluorescent lights of the trauma center felt harsh after 2 nights of broken sleep. Dana moved through her morning appointments mechanically, her mind drifting to Joshua every time she glanced at the empty chair where he used to sit. The other counselors noticed her distraction, but kindly said nothing. attributing it to another hard day of working with trauma survivors. By early afternoon, her grocery list had grown into a necessity. She couldn't keep skipping meals, no matter how little appetite she had. The local supermarket's familiar red sign offered a semblance of normalcy as she pulled into the parking lot. Dana was checking her shopping list one last time when the low rumble of a motorcycle caught her attention. Something about the sound made her pause, her hand frozen on the car door handle. The bike circled the lot slowly, like a shark testing the waters. The rider's leather vest bore no visible patches, but his deliberate movements sent a chill down her spine. Before she could retreat into her car, another figure approached from between the parked vehicles. Her heart stopped as she recognized him, the enforcer from Joshua's old club, his weathered face set in a predatory smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Fancy meeting you here." Dana's throat went dry. She straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "Can I help you?" The enforcer moved closer, maintaining a calculated distance that wouldn't draw attention from other shoppers. "Just making sure you understand the situation. Joshua's being difficult. Sometimes people need motivation to make the right choice." "Leave him alone," Dana said, her voice stronger than she felt. The enforcer's smile widened. "See, that's exactly the kind of interference we're talking about. Bad things happen when people don't mind their own business." Suddenly, the air crackled with tension as a familiar figure burst onto the scene. Joshua appeared like an avenging angel, his face twisted with rage. He'd lost weight since she'd last seen him, dark circles under his eyes speaking of sleepless nights. "Back off," Joshua growled, positioning himself between Dana and the enforcer. The enforcer's smile never wavered. "There you are, brother. Been looking for you." "I'm not your brother." Joshua's hands clenched into fists. "You follow her again. We're going to have more than words." The enforcer stepped forward, and for a terrifying moment, Dana thought violence would erupt right there in the parking lot. Joshua shifted his stance, ready for a fight, but she grabbed his arm. "Joshua, don't!" she pleaded, her fingers digging into his jacket. The tension held for several heartbeats before the enforcer stepped back, chuckling. "Just delivering a message. Clock's ticking." He turned and walked to where the other motorcycle waited, both bikes roaring to life and peeling out of the parking lot. Joshua's body remained rigid until the bikes disappeared. Then he turned to Dana, his face crumpling with guilt. "I'm so sorry. I'm so damn sorry." "How did you know?" Dana asked, still gripping his arm. "Been watching them. Found out they were planning something." He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I've been keeping an eye on you from a distance, trying to make sure—" His voice broke. Dana looked around the parking lot, suddenly feeling exposed. "We need to get out of here." Joshua nodded. "You shouldn't be alone. They might come back." "Follow me to my house," Dana said, making a decision. "We need to talk. Really talk." The drive home felt endless, Dana constantly checking her rearview mirror for motorcycles. Joshua's bike stayed close behind her, a reassuring presence despite everything. When they finally pulled into her driveway, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Inside, Dana's kitchen felt like a sanctuary. She moved on autopilot, turning on lights, filling the kettle for tea. Joshua stood awkwardly by the table until she gestured for him to sit. "You look terrible," she said softly, noting the exhaustion etched into his face. "Haven't been sleeping much?" He stared at his hands on the table. "Been too worried about you." Dana set 2 mugs of tea between them and sat down. "We can't keep living like this." "I know." Joshua wrapped his hands around the warm mug, but didn't drink. "I thought leaving would protect you. but they're not going to stop. Then we face them together, Dana said firmly. Running away, hiding, it's not working. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as darkness gathered outside. Joshua's shoulders slumped, the weight of his guilt visible in every line of his body. I never meant for any of this to touch you, he said quietly. You've been through enough. Dana reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. So have you. That's why we're going to figure this out. Together. For the first time in days, something like hope flickered in Joshua's eyes. They sat there as night settled around them, two people bound by circumstances neither had chosen, finding strength in the simple act of not being alone. The morning sun barely peeked through Dana's kitchen windows as she nursed her third cup of coffee. Neither she nor Joshua had slept much, spending most of the night discussing options and possibilities. Now, watching him doze fitfully on her couch, she knew exactly what needed to be done. Dana pulled out her phone and opened her contacts, scrolling through names. Her thumb hesitated for just a moment before pressing call. Mike, it's Dana Whitmore. I need your help with something important. Over the next hour, she made similar calls to other firefighters, veterans, and volunteers from the trauma center, people whose lives had intersected with Joshua's during his volunteer work. Each call followed a similar pattern, explaining the situation, hearing their concern, and feeling her heart lift as they immediately offered support. He fixed my grandson's wheelchair last month, said Betty, an elderly volunteer. Just count me in, dear. Those bullies need to learn they can't push good people around. By mid-morning, Joshua stirred awake to find Dana making yet another call, his brow furrowed as he caught fragments of the conversation. Dana, he said after she hung up, what are you doing? She turned to face him, determination bright in her eyes. Building an army. What? He sat up straighter, alarm crossing his face. Not that kind of army, she assured him. Remember Tom from the veterans group? The one whose walker you repaired? He's coming. So is Mike from the fire station and at least 15 others. Joshua shook his head in disbelief. Dana, no. These are dangerous people. I can't let civilians get involved. They're already involved, she said firmly. This is their community too, and you'd be surprised how many people care about what happens to you. His face crumpled slightly. Why would they risk anything for me? Because you've shown them who you really are, Dana said softly. Every time you fixed something without being asked, every time you helped carry boxes or stayed late to clean up, they noticed. Throughout the morning, messages kept coming in. More people wanted to help. By early afternoon, Dana's phone was buzzing constantly with updates from those heading to the trauma center parking lot. Joshua paced nervously. This is crazy. We don't even know if they'll show up today. They will, Dana said. Your old enforcer friend made it clear yesterday that time was running out. They'll come looking for you. They arrived at the trauma center parking lot around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Joshua's breath caught in his throat at the sight that greeted them. At least 20 people had already gathered, familiar faces from community events and volunteer work. Mike, the firefighter, stood talking with a group of veterans. Betty sat in her chair, knitting needles clicking away as if this were just another social gathering. Others milled around, drinking coffee and chatting quietly. I don't understand, Joshua whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Dana squeezed his arm. You're not alone anymore. That's all you need to understand. The group arranged themselves casually around the parking lot, making it look natural rather than confrontational. Some sat on benches. Others leaned against their vehicles. They were ready. The distinctive rumble of motorcycles reached them first. Joshua tensed as 5 bikes rolled into view, led by the enforcer. The bikers pulled to a stop, clearly thrown off by the unexpected crowd. The enforcer's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. His gaze landed on Joshua, standing with Dana among the gathered community members. "What's this supposed to be?" he called out, his voice carrying across the lot. Mike stepped forward, his firefighter's badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "This is what community looks like," he said calmly. "We take care of our own." The enforcer's jaw tightened. "This isn't your business." "Actually, it is," Betty spoke up from her chair, never stopping her knitting. "When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us." Other voices joined in, quiet but firm. The veterans stood straight-backed and steady. Former clients from the trauma center whom Joshua had helped stepped closer. Even the center's maintenance man, whose truck Joshua had fixed last month, moved to stand nearby. The enforcer studied the crowd, his expression calculating. Joshua could see him weighing the options, considering the optics of any violence against this peaceful group of community members. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably on their machines. Finally, the enforcer spat on the ground. "You've gone soft," he said to Joshua, "running to these people for protection." "No," Joshua replied, finding his voice. "I found something stronger than fear." The standoff stretched for several more tense moments. Then, without another word, the enforcer kicked his bike into gear. One by one, the other bikes roared to life, and the group pulled out of the parking lot. The thunder of their engines faded into the distance. Joshua's legs suddenly felt weak. Dana caught his arm as he swayed, supporting him while he struggled to process what had just happened. Around them, people began to relax, breaking into small groups, patting Joshua's shoulder as they passed. "I never thought—" Joshua's voice cracked. "I didn't think anyone would—" "Of course we would," Mike said, approaching with a warm smile. "You're one of us now, whether you like it or not." Betty wheeled over, holding out a paper bag. "I brought cookies. I think we could all use something sweet after all that excitement." Laughter rippled through the group, breaking the last of the tension. People began sharing the cookies, telling stories, treating the moment like a celebration rather than the aftermath of a confrontation. Dana stayed close to Joshua, watching as he slowly accepted the reality of what had just happened. His hands still trembled slightly, but his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them in days. "Thank you," he whispered to her, "for believing in me, for all of this." She smiled, feeling the warmth of the community surrounding them. "You did this yourself, Joshua. By showing people who you really are, one small kindness at a time." Around them, the impromptu gathering continued, people chatting and sharing cookies in the afternoon sun. The threat that had loomed so large had been dissolved not by violence or force, but by the simple power of people standing together, refusing to let fear win. Joshua looked at the faces around him, faces that had become familiar through small interactions and quiet moments of helping others. For the first time since leaving his old life behind, he felt truly free. The weight of his past seemed lighter, balanced by the unexpected gift of belonging he'd found in this unlikely group of people who had chosen to stand with him when he needed them most. Later that afternoon, Joshua and Dana found a quiet corner in one of the center's counseling rooms. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a peaceful glow that matched their lighter hearts after the morning's events. "I'm done," Joshua said firmly, running a hand through his graying hair. "Complete break from that life. No looking back." Dana leaned forward in her chair. "What do you want to do now?" "I want to give back somehow, make up for lost time." His eyes held a new spark of purpose. "But I don't know where to start." Dana's face brightened. "Actually, I might have an idea. The center's starting a mentorship program for at-risk teens. Many of them need guidance, especially with practical skills. Your mechanical knowledge could be perfect." Joshua looked uncertain. "Me? Working with kids? They're teenagers who need someone who understands their struggles, someone real." They discussed it with Dr. Carter, the center's director, who immediately saw the potential. Within days, Joshua was officially welcomed as a volunteer mentor. The following week brought remarkable changes. Joshua set up a small workshop space where he taught basic motorcycle maintenance to troubled teens. His quiet patience and understanding drew them in. They recognized authenticity in him, someone who'd walked through darkness and found his way back. Between sessions, Dana would find him in deep conversation with a teen, sharing stories or demonstrating how to adjust a carburetor. The kids opened up to him in ways they hadn't with other mentors. Each evening, Dana and Joshua would share dinner, sometimes at the local diner, other times bringing takeout back to the center. Their conversations flowed easily now, touching on hopes, fears, and dreams of second chances. "I never thought I could do this," Joshua admitted one evening over coffee. "I knew you could," Dana replied softly. Walking her to her car that night, Joshua paused. The parking lot was quiet, streetlights casting a gentle glow. He turned to face her, his heart full of everything they'd been through together. Without words, he drew her into his arms. Dana moved closer, fitting perfectly against him, as if they'd been meant to find each other all along. The evening air wrapped around them like a blanket as they held each other, finally at peace in the quiet moment they'd been waiting for. The warm evening air settled around the trauma center as Dana made final preparations for the expanded grief support program's first meeting. Her heart felt full, knowing this would honor Mark's memory while helping others heal. The meeting room slowly filled with folding chairs that Joshua methodically arranged in a welcoming circle. "How's that?" he asked, stepping back to survey his work. "Perfect," Dana replied, smoothing a tablecloth over the refreshment table. "Thank you for helping set everything up." As people began arriving, Joshua stationed himself near the entrance, greeting newcomers with a gentle nod and directing them to the sign-in table. Dana watched him interact with everyone, from elderly widows to young parents who'd lost children. His intimidating appearance had softened over time, replaced by a quiet strength that put people at ease. Throughout the meeting, Dana led discussions about grief and healing, while Joshua listened attentively from the back row. She caught his eye several times, drawing strength from his steady presence. When participants shared their stories, she noticed how he leaned forward slightly, showing genuine care for each person's journey. As the meeting wound down and the last attendees filtered out, Dana felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with gratitude. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, a safe space for people to find hope in their darkness. Joshua helped stack the chairs and tidy up, working in comfortable silence beside her. When everything was put away, they stepped out onto the center's front porch. The gentle glow of the porch light cast warm shadows around them as crickets chirped in the distance. Without hesitation, Joshua wrapped his arms around her in a protective embrace. Dana melted into his hold, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Gone was the trembling uncertainty that had marked their early encounters. In its place was something solid and sure. Looking up at him, Dana whispered the same words she'd said weeks ago, but this time they carried hope instead of desperation. "Don't leave. I need this." Joshua's smile was tender as he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised softly. They stood there together in the quiet night, the trauma center behind them no longer representing pain and loss, but transformation and healing. It had become the birthplace of their second chance, a place where both their broken pieces had finally found a way to mend. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.